So in the timeline section, I showed you a little bit about setting audio levels with rubber banding and keyframes. We're going to show you a little bit about how to do it with the audio mixer in both the sequence side and on the source side. The first thing that we need to do is I want to add a few more audio tracks. And to do that, the keyboard shortcut for that is Command U and Command U again, and I've added now tracks 3 and 4. I'm going to drag track 2 down to track 4 and track 1 down to track 3, and that will patch tracks 1 and 2 to tracks 3 and 4. Now what I'm going to do is open up my Glow Williamson AIFF track. This is my music from my buddy Mark Williamson in Nashville. Custom made this for me. A little loud. And we will mark an in at the beginning and out at the end, and we'll just edit that in. So now we have an audio track, some music underneath, and these tracks are that narration section that we just cut together in the previous section. So what we want to do is we want to mix the levels of the music against the levels of the dialogue. And another thing I just want to show you, because this is pretty cool, is remember that we can rename these tracks to be what they are. So if we want to call this dialogue or narration, let's call it narration. And we'll do the same thing here. Rename track narration 2 maybe. And then down here we'll call this our music track. Music 1 and Music 2. I know this is very creative of me. I understand how impressive that is to come up with that naming scheme. Anyhow, so now we actually know by looking at our tracks what is on each track. That's very useful to me, I think. If we listen to this, we can see our audio levels are cranked through the roof. This is showing our audio levels. Very loud. Obviously, it's all music. And somewhere buried in there is our dialogue. So let's pull the music down. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to go up to Tools, and we're going to choose Audio Mixer. And we can also choose, if we wanted to, the audio tool, but basically the audio tool is identical to this little section above the timeline. I just called it up there so you could see it, but this will give us our audio levels as well, and you can see they're very loud. We're going to try to change the audio levels on tracks 3 and 4 because they're too loud. We want to do what's called ganging them. If you click these two little buttons, that means if you click on one of these sliders, it pulls both sliders in the gang down. If I were to gang all of these, even though these are up higher, as I pull these up and down, they all move up and down in relationship to each other. I only want to move tracks 3 and 4 down, so I've ganged them, and now I can just click and drag. If I want to, I can actually type a specific number like -12, and I can choose my levels that way as well. Play. My music's still very hot. You can see my music levels are way too high, so we're going to pull them down a little bit more. We're going to bring up the overall volume now.
All that hard work, but not every bat is created equal.
And they're much better. You can see that I've got my scratch track. I recorded that pretty low, and so I've got that cranked up. I already did that earlier, all the way up to 12. You'll notice that as I move the timeline to the next clip, my levels go all the way back down to 0 again. If I want to, I can move them back up one at a time, or as I showed you before, if I gang them, that's another way to do it. Now, I don't want to have to go through each one of these tracks and move them all up to 12. That's just a big pain in the butt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark an in and an out that are inclusive of the tracks that I want to change the levels on. This first one now is all the way up to 12. If you see, these other ones are still at 0. Park on the spot where I've got them up to 12, and if we go up to this hamburger menu, you can see set levels on tracks in to out. And as I click on that, now as I go to each track, they're all set at 12.
You put in the hours of BP, the countless swings in the cave.
The music levels are still a little hot. I'll ungang the narration tracks, pull this down a little bit more, listen again.
When you step up to
much better.
You need a bat that's going to do.
So that's how to change your levels in the sequence. Now, the other way that's very useful to change levels, for example, if you want to just change the level of the source clip so that every time you cut this in, those levels are at 12, just click on the source side. And now in the source side, you can see that you only have 2 channels of source audio. Tracks 3 and 4 aren't active because tracks 3 and 4 are actually in a sequence. We're dealing with the source. So if you want to crank these up to 12, once again, gang them, click on 1, and pull it up to the top. The other thing that you might notice that's good for this narration track is that the pan for each of these is set to mid, which is exactly where we want it to be set. Narration is usually panned to the middle. If we wanted to have these panned left and right, you can just click on it and drag these left. You have to ungang them to have one go different than the other. And there we go. So now we've got these panned left and right to 100. If you want to reset them to the middle, you can Alt-click and that resets to the middle, or you can click and type 0 and that also resets to the middle. So that's a little bit about how to use the audio mixer to set levels in both your source and your sequence.